It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
Good, ready for a vacation.
Ready for a vacation. All right, well, we're going on our summer break after this show. Also with us is Rim Mumtaz, Paris correspondent for Politico. How are you?
I'm well.
Okay. German television producer Ulrike Koltermann, who's been regaling us with tales of her preparations for Bastille Day coverage, is with us as well. And Nick Spicer, we always love it when visitors drop in. Nick Spicer, our Berlin correspondent, is with us. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah.
All right. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. If you blinked, you missed it. Over the past weekend, the Mail on Sunday publishing leaked diplomatic cables by the UK ambassador to Washington. And by Wednesday, Kim Darroch had thrown in the towel. It did not help matters that the President of the United States had just tweeted, quote, "The wacky ambassador at the UK foisted upon the United States is not someone we're thrilled with, a very stupid guy." The papers claim that it was watching Boris Johnson equivocate about the special relationship during his Conservative Party leadership debate with Jeremy Hunt that may have been the last straw for Darroch. And ever since Wednesday, Boris has been asked about it.
I think the president's tweets could perhaps be more diplomatic. There's no doubt about that. But then sometimes some things I say could be more diplomatic. The most important thing is that the UK and the US have a very, very good relationship. That's what we need to ensure. And the friendship and partnership in the UK and the US is the most important geostrategic fact of the last 100 years.
You're right.
What crap that is. God, unbelievable. First of all, talk about describing Trump. Boris Johnson's on the record in 2015 talking about Trump's stupefying ignorance. That's a quote. And saying that he was completely incompetent to be president of the United States. This is after he was talking about a Muslim ban back in 2015. Then we have the question of the special relationship, which is totally twisted in the minds, particularly of the British. The idea of the special relationship developed mainly during and after World War I and through World War II, when we were talking about the relationship between the British Empire and the United States of America. After World War II, there was no British Empire. A couple of years after that, it was just this miserable island. And that's where it belongs. No, look, the idea that Britain is in any way an equivalent of the United States and can deal with it on equal terms is completely delusional. Its economy may be the 5th largest in the world, they love to say that, but it is only 1/7 the size of the United States economy, and it's only 1/5 the size of the Chinese economy. So what is the point of this special relationship? When the United States wanted to do something, when Obama wanted to do something in Syria, he thought he had an alliance. France and Britain would back him. So where was the special relationship? The House of Commons voted it down and made that alliance almost impossible. So I don't see what all this stuff about the special relationship is. And if they're going to sell Brexit on the idea that you can replace this very special relationship between the UK and the European Union with the special relationship with the United States, it's delusional. So that's what I think.
Rim Mumtaz.
Listen, I think you're taking it from a bizarre angle, the whole special relationship.
Angle.
I don't know that it's original. I don't think in talking about a special relationship, it's about talking about two countries that are of the same weight. No one in Europe pretends that they are of the same weight of the US. There are privileged channels of communication. There are privileged partnerships when it comes to defense, for example, between the US and the UK. I think that's undeniable. On the other hand, there definitely has been a sense in DC and in that DC bubble that the UK presence or influence in DC has been diminished and they haven't really kept up with the times. But the most troubling thing about this issue is, whoever leaked these diplomatic cables, everyone knows, every country in the world, their diplomats are in these countries to write such brutally honest cables back. That is literally their job. And for that cable to have been leaked is extremely problematic. And then for the president of the US to think it's okay.
Is it really extremely problematic? Because WikiLeaks did the same thing with the US diplomatic
Very
cable.
problematic. WikiLeaks are problematic.
But most of it was deemed to be kind of water cooler chatter.
Well, to a certain extent, but then within that water cooler chatter, there is enough that should be privileged. And by revealing these leaks or these cables, we actually curtail the ability of diplomats to do their job. There is a sense, a part of diplomacy needs to be kept out of the public eye.
I think it raises a different question. I mean, why do you need diplomats to say something that everyone is crying out loudly and clearly? I mean, it's not a surprise what was in these messages. Yeah. You can read it in any paper. So why all the fuss about the diplomat? And then you can say, okay, we need to protect the cables.
But hang on. In this case, he was uninvited to a banquet for the Emir of Qatar. Donald Trump had made it clear that Kim Darroch's remaining months as UK ambassador to Washington would not be easy.
Yes, but then what would have been needed was more support from home because, as you said, he was just doing his job. It is his job to inform his government, although the government could just read the papers and have exactly the same information.
Yeah. I mean, if I may, I would just say, look, I mean, I'm not going to tell Boris Johnson how to do his job, but it's not to defend the transatlantic relationship. It's to defend the interests of the United Kingdom, and that includes its civil service.
All right, let's listen on that score to what the Prime Minister said, the outgoing Prime Minister. Her remarks during Prime Minister's question time clearly seemed aimed at her probable successor.
Good government depends on public servants being able to give full and frank advice. I want all our public servants to have the confidence to be able to do that. And I hope the House will reflect on the importance of defending our values and principles, particularly when they are under pressure.
Nick Spicer?
I agree. This was my point. Thank you. The British Prime Minister agrees with me. I would add, I agree with Chris about the transatlantic relationship. I think it's part of the mythology of Brexit, and which is built also on World War II, and we stood alone. Look at Canada's trading relationship with the United States. It's much bigger than the trading relationship between the European Union and the United States, part of Five Eyes, the countries that share intelligence and so on. From having worked in Berlin as a correspondent for a number of years, Barack Obama called Angela Merkel when he had a problem in Europe for a number of years. Even after it was revealed that the NSA was tapping her cell phone, she was still the go-to person. It wasn't
Obama, who, by the way, also had a fractious, at times, relationship with the UK. Remember, he took down the bust of Winston Churchill when he moved into the White House.
Yeah, I don't know what the motivation was. I think he put one of Lincoln in, or was it MLK? But in any case, this idea of a transatlantic relationship being the thing that structure, I'm inclined to agree with Chris. It's not that real a thing.
Not that real a thing?
No, it's a huge exaggeration.
It was in 2003 when George W. Bush needed an ally.
What was it we called the Prime Minister in those days?
Poodle.
Bush's poodle.
Oh.
That's right, Bush's poodle. A humiliation for Great Britain, for God's sake. And let's also add that one reason that Theresa May would be speaking the way she did is because Trump went out of his way to personally insult her and her handling of Brexit. She should have listened to him. Britain should listen to him about how to do Brexit. Come on. How can they suck up this kind of arrogance on the part of the United States? Why can they? Because they're little, not very significant country.
Right now it's campaign time, right, for that Tory leadership contest. We'll know by the 23rd of July if Boris Johnson, and we expect it to be the case, will be the next Prime Minister of the UK. What does this incident prejudge about what kind of a PM he'll be?
That's been the main question. Is this going to be the kind of prime minister who doesn't stand up for his own diplomats, who is so eager to please this very tempestuous US president? Is he, as Christopher was saying, trying already to start or jumpstart a kind of negotiation with the US? He's going to be very disappointed. Just look at what the US Treasury said today when it comes to the UK tax on the big tech companies. They said,
we'll talk about later.
We'll talk about that later. But clearly, the Americans are like, you think you're going to get a special trade deal out of us, keep on dreaming. Of course, in the world of Trump, of course, it is all about balance of power. He only thinks of you around the table in terms of how much money you are worth and how many nuclear submarines you have. There's no question about that. The issue with the UK ambassador to the US is more one, how does he allow himself, the president of the US, to talk this way about the ambassador of one of the US's oldest allies? That's one. And second, obviously, the UK prime minister just not having his back.
The prime minister, the next prime minister.
Well, the next UK
The likely
prime minister,
next.
right?
The likely next prime minister. Now, the UK's got the special relationship. It's also got strong bilateral defense ties with France. Either way, steady nerves are needed in the Gulf these days, where the Royal Navy's HMS Montrose says it stood down 3 unmarked Iranian ships earlier in the week. The Foreign Office claims they were trying to block a UK oil tanker. Tehran dismisses the claim. Tehran still fuming over the interception off Gibraltar last week of an Iranian tanker suspected of trying to break the oil embargo on Syria.
You are the initiator of insecurity, and you will realize the consequences later. Now you are so hopeless that when one of your tankers wants to move in the region, you have to bring your frigates to escort it because you are scared.
Ulrika Coulterman. And by the way, there's a second warship on the way to relieve the first one.
I think it's a very dangerous situation. And I mean, it's the result of the sanctions. I mean, Iran waited for a while and they announced that they're going to retaliate. And it can escalate very soon. I mean, the main problem is that the US are less dependent on Middle Eastern oil. So they try more and more. They are less dependent on the Strait of Hormuz, which is a very strategic point. And they're trying to form an alliance against Iran. But it can't work this way because there was a deal and it would have been much better to save the deal instead of breaking everything up and risking big new conflict.
Let's take the story from the top. It's in terms of the tension with the UK. It starts last week with the seizure of that ship off Gibraltar. What do you make of it?
British Royal Marines did it, but at the instigation of the United States. Apparently, the British are trying to work with the United States on this issue of isolating Iran as much as possible. Is that an intelligent policy? I think Ulrika's right. I mean, and also, in this case, Rouhani is right. The United States started this crisis. They started it by pulling out of the JCPOA, the nuclear accord. Iran has telegraphed its blows right down the line, whether it's going to increase uranium enrichment or, in fact, make life difficult or scary for tankers in the Gulf. We didn't have to be here, but Trump thought he could get a better deal.
In the case of the UK, you have a country which, on the one hand, is working in close tandem with the United States, but on the other hand, part of that 3-country initiative with Germany and France to try to mediate to keep the Iranians in that 2015 nuclear deal.
Yeah, well, Germany is keen on the deal and is proud of having been part of that diplomatic achievement because German diplomats aren't typically that active or that involved in resolving major international crises, and that was seen as a big win when it was signed. I think that the French diplomats are actually more active. Emmanuel Macron's emissary has been in Tehran the past 2 days, I think, or 2 days, after having served 3 years in Tehran, so he's a man who knows what's going on. I think Germans are just probably going to let the French take the lead on this particular one. They're involved in the creation of the new payment system, which allows European companies to go around SWIFT, which doesn't really work. Hopefully it's going to encourage the Iranians to, accord a few more weeks of patience to the process.
Because when the week began, we were thinking with Mumtaz, with the dispatch of Emmanuel Macron's top diplomatic advisor to Tehran, after a phone call with not just Hassan Rouhani, but also with Donald Trump, that perhaps Trump saw the possibility of it spiraling out of control and didn't like what he saw. But now, where do things stand with this new tension with those UK ships?
Okay, I think the situation right now, first of all, France is walking a very, very tight rope here. They know it. They're trying to keep expectations low. They understand that what they're trying to broker, and they're very clear that they are not mediators. They are not mediators because they are party to the deal. They're not a neutral third party. So in diplomatic speak, that's important. And they have interests, and the French interests are not the American interests. They have interests in maintaining security, in maintaining non-proliferation. Obviously, the escalation in the Gulf is exactly what the Europeans have been telling the Americans for the past year would happen if the US strategy of maximal pressure was not cooled off. So now we are at that point, which is why the French are trying their best to what they call de-escalate. All they're looking for, it's a very limited...
Where's the daylight is the question.
The daylight is in two things. It was very interesting to see, and we've been seeing these pictures, this footage of the French ambassador's top diplomatic, the French president's top diplomatic advisor in Iran.
Emmanuel Bonne.
It's very interesting how publicized his visit was by the Iranians. He was there 3 weeks ago, June 19th and 20th, and it was kept completely under wraps. This time around, the Iranians brought in all of their media and they plastered it everywhere. And what was also interesting is that despite the fact that Trump tweeted that more substantial sanctions were coming very soon, while Bonne was meeting with Rouhani, and Rouhani, we're told by the Élysée, mentioned it, the next day actually continued saying, we are going to try to find a way for an economic ceasefire. So the Iranians so far are playing their own smart game, which is that they think that this approach by the French may lead to something. That's really kind of the silver lining right now. They haven't stopped talking. And what's interesting, what we're hearing from the French is that from that bilateral that Macron had with Trump in Caen around D-Day, that's when he started signaling that he wants a deal. He didn't say he was going to stop the sanctions. He didn't say he would reinstate the waivers on oil, which is exactly what the Iranians want and are asking for.
Yeah, and unprompted, Donald Trump mentions the French at the G20 summit, saying, oh, there's lots of people talking to the Iranians. So he gave the game up. There's something going on.
He knew because from June 6th, he had talked to Macron about putting something in place. It doesn't mean it's going to lead to something. We have to see. Macron has set Monday as a date for them to sort of take stock of where they're at, whether the Iranians and the Americans are willing to at least freeze the situation right now in the escalation, and then see whether they can continue.
See where it goes. We'll be right back, and when we do, we'll see where the French have problems on a different front with the United States over digital tech giants. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us, sporting his summer jacket.
Seemed like the time.
All right, as well, we're with Rim Mumtaz, Paris correspondent for Politico. We're with German television producer Ulrike Koltermann and France 24's very own Berlin correspondent Nick Spicer. In the end, the French Senate electing to shrug off the threat of U.S. tariffs and approve a bill from the lower house that slaps a 3% tax on revenue earned on French soil by digital giants, a so-called GAFA tax, as in Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon.
Je voudrais rappeler que c'est la première fois.
I would like to remind you that this is the first time in the history of relations between the United States and France that the US administration has decided to launch a procedure under Section 301. I deeply believe that between allies, we can and should solve our differences with other means than threats.
Chris Riddicky, is that threat of tariffs against the French? We're always having tariffs, right?
Yeah, if memory serves, Section 301, that was a national security concern. And how Google, Amazon, Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, How they are national security interests, I'm not sure in this context. Now, if Twitter were included, we would know that President Trump felt that his gonads were on the line, but not these four.
All right, and this GAFA tax. Now they've been talking about it at the European level. So far, it hasn't worked because, well, 4 countries are against: Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Ireland, which is the tax home for a lot of these silicon giants. So the French and pretty soon the British next March as well, but also the Spanish, the Austrians are saying let's just go for it.
I'm not that surprised, given if you cast your mind back to how Europe was the only regulatory authority that was able to unbundle Microsoft's operating system from its browser, which was, what was it called, Explorer? Can't remember. When the American antitrust authority was unable to do so, the Americans take the lead. I think. I mean, the Europeans take the lead. I think when it comes to regulating what seems to be unregulatable in the United States for whatever reason. And I think it's also worth noting that some of the Democratic front runners for the candidacy of the Democratic Party in the American presidential election are talking about, I think it was Elizabeth Warren in particular, talking about this, having a tax, not letting these guys make so much money untaxed. It's not that original, but it is typical for the Europeans to be leading it.
In the case of France, though, let's see, what is that story you've covered every Saturday since the month of November?
Yeah, I mean, for Macron, definitely it's a social issue. So
Yeah, because you've had the yellow vest.
Yes, yellow vest. So he had a big uprising and he had to struggle a lot and to do a bit more on the social front, which is
and they
was built
reason.
on Facebook, by the way.
Yeah, they got organized by Facebook.
But they complain that here we are paying all our taxes
and they don't, and they're right. And it's a shame that Europe didn't act as a community, that France took the lead. I mean, Macron is under pressure as always, and he always wants to be the first and the only one and the fastest. And
all right, in its lead editorial, the Financial Times, singing the praises of France and the UK, whose 2% digital tax would also be lifted if there was a global agreement on how to deal with the reality of today's globalized e-commerce. The editorial says their end goal is not to splinter international policies, but rather to increase pressure for a multilateral solution.
There's a lot of irony in what the US is doing right now. One, they're now talking about, well, no, hang on, don't do it yourself. Let's talk within the OECD. Except Trump wants to get out of the OECD, or at least diminish the money that the US contributes to the OECD. So he needs to, figure out what he wants to do with the OECD. That's one. Second, isn't it odd that the US is now launching this investigation into whether this tax is what they call unfair trade practices, when at the same time, America is imposing extraterritorial sanctions that are literally freezing out European companies from markets like Iran? I mean, who should be launching this kind of investigation? Isn't it the Europeans?
But in the case of Silicon Valley, it runs along both sides of the aisle. We all remember Barack Obama seemed to always be inviting Eric Schmidt, the boss of Google, to the White House.
Well, I mean, that's why they've been lobbying very hard in the White House. But the reality is, France is completely has the right to tax very lucrative activities within its own borders. Isn't that what taxation is? I mean, I don't get it.
It's a matter of
and it's only
sovereignty.
3%.
Does the state still have the authority to regulate commerce, or is GAFA some kind of supranational? Are they their own states with their own rules?
I don't think any of those companies, any of those digital companies, are going to get a lot of sympathy from the public. It's not just the yellow vests. I mean, really, 3%? What are we talking about here?
Peanuts.
Billions and billions that all of them make? No. I think that in fact, I think they're lucky if they get away with 3%, because in terms of the popular attitudes toward them, yeah, people use them, but people have really learned to hate them, especially Facebook.
Yeah.
Not just Facebook, but also Amazon, in the sense of the fact that Amazon
I sell my books on Amazon. Let's
really? No, but it seemed to be squeezing out the local bookshop in the case you just brought up.
And the local grocery store soon.
And well, all kinds of commerce, but that's not just Amazon, and I'm not actually defending Amazon, but Facebook is the one that has really been involved with a lot of political offenses.
Yeah.
And Amazon, yes, I mean, it's offered a product that is totally disruptive and destructive to main streets all over the world, and also to lots of shopping malls. I mean, you go to Florida and it's just one dead mall after another. It's amazing. So we can complain about disruption. Okay, that's one thing. That's unpopular in some ways. The real problem is that these companies are making enormous amounts of money, and in the countries where they are making that money, they are not paying taxes. I don't think anybody is going to sympathize with those companies, except maybe Trump.
But then, no, there are some countries, it's understandable that they don't want to tax them because they at least get the jobs, like Ireland. So they also have their point.
And Ireland's vote is as heavy as anyone's in the European Union. So
Nothing's wrong, insists the German government. But just to make sure nothing goes wrong, Protocol on Thursday preferred to have Angela Merkel sit at a ceremony welcoming her new Danish counterpart. This after Merkel, for the third time in under a month, was seen trembling while standing at a public function. This time earlier in the week in the company of the Finnish Prime Minister in Berlin. Aides to the 65-year-old chancellor claimed the new cases of trembling might be psychosomatic, recollections of the first episode triggering fresh bouts. She insists that she is fine.
I believe that I said everything that needs to be said. I think that me saying that I'm fine should be enough. Like I said, I have to process this incident. It's an ongoing process, and I believe that it happened one day, and it will now disappear. Otherwise, I'm convinced that I'm quite capable of doing my job.
Gut leistungsfähig bin.
Well, I think people should respect it and just let her live her life. I mean, I could start shaking when I read her schedule. The things she's doing, it's like these discussions at EU level, talking all night, meeting one after the other, crisis meetings.
But Ulrike, you're reporting from a country where we've had two presidents who hid from the public the fact that they had cancer. One of them, François Mitterrand, even ran on the campaign promising that if he ever got sick, he would tell the public, and he knew already he was sick.
That's what Angela Merkel said. She said, I want to stay in power if health allows it. And if she says that for now she's okay and she can handle it, let's believe her. I mean...
I mean, there's a tradition of respecting the private life in Germany, which is long-standing and has...
but she's the most powerful leader in Europe. Doesn't the public have a right to know what a real... Because she's given scant information on what's wrong.
I think there are reasons why there's no annual medical report as there is in the United States. The German Constitution isn't designed in such a way as to put all the power into one person and to make them all powerful, and that's deliberate because of the Second World War. I think there's a generalized, affection for Angela Merkel. She's riding around 65% in the.
She's turning 65.
No, but she's 65% in the opinion poll, and 65 years old. Happy birthday to her soon. So people feel, they trust her. There's a high level of trust. But, as one of the newspapers said, when she trembles, the nation trembles. She's got a lot on her shoulders. And I think generally speaking, when you look at why leaders lie about their health, Helmut Schmidt used to faint all the time. His aides found him hundreds of times on the floor. Helmut Kohl had prostate cancer in 1989 before a big summit. They do it because they can't afford to be seen as weak in public because the knives will be drawn out. And when you look at how Angela Merkel has to go to these EU summits, which go on forever, and she's usually the person who waits until the very end and say, okay, boys, this is what it's going to be. And they know she's tired or can be made to be tired. It's a weakness for Germany as a whole.
A weakness for Germany as a whole. And there's a coalition government, right? And so if something goes wrong with her, where do German politics go?
I think there's a lot of very problematic points here. What about, in a democracy, the right of the citizens to know whether their elected officials are fit to continue doing what they're doing? I take the point of the very long, all-night European Council summits, but there are 27 other leaders there who are not shaking. They're also going all night. And they're also playing, some of them, quite important roles. So at some point, it's okay to say, we're all human. It's okay to say, I'm tired or something's happening. And it seems to be kind of foreign to Germany and the German culture to ask these questions because there's a lot of privacy when it comes to, medical, personal situations. Maybe that's starting to change.
Well, there are also conditions that are very hard to diagnose. I mean, sometimes it's a question of concealment. Sometimes it's a question of an unclear diagnosis. Mm-hmm. I have no idea what's wrong with Angela Merkel. But when Pope John Paul II had Parkinson's, it took them forever to admit it, but it also took them a very long time to diagnose it properly. So I think that, it's possible when she stands there and says, I've told you as much as I need to tell you, she may also be saying as much as she can tell you at this point. And her argument is, as long as I can do the job, I'll do the job.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's reasonable.
No, of course. And as you said, it's hard to diagnose sometimes certain situations, but the questions are legitimate.
But I think she's responsible enough to know. I mean, I just think she would step down if she can't do it anymore. And there's a chance, or however you say, that in autumn the government will crumble anyway, because we have elections in 3 eastern German states, and the coalition is at the, let's say, just before the end. So there might be new elections, and there's already someone in place who's just waiting to take her job. So it won't be a nightmare if she steps down.
Quick closing thought, or I don't know if you want to keep going, but I mean, lest we think, Angela Merkel, like all the other politicians, just wants to hold on to power no matter what. She's organized her succession. It's programmed. She's off the stage in 2021. Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer is her replacement. Will she become chancellor? The voters will decide. But she's planning to leave and has no ambitions.
All right. Well, one final question for you, which is the way it's been covered in the German press. Because as Rim was saying, citizens want to know, and yet it's been. I was reading today about it being buried on the inside pages. And
who's the front page of Bild on the
outside of Bild?
Everybody reads Bild.
Is there an outside of Bild?
It shapes public opinion. I mean, you read Bild and then you confirm somewhere else. Sorry, Bild. That's true. It was the front page before she went to the G20 because she said I was really hot and therefore I was trembling, and then she was in the air-conditioned presidential palace. So it's out there. There are some, but there's not, I think, a tidal wave of. She's got to explain herself. There's none of that. I don't know.
And there is not even a hint that some mental capacities are affected?
No.
You can talk about other leaders and think about the mental health issue.
President of the United States.
Yeah. Proof for me is that soundbite we just heard, because she basically said nothing, which is her genius of giving no traction to journalists. I've sat through hour-long news conferences and everybody's like, did you get anything? No.
But she seems stoned.
So she's performing well as far as the soundbites go.
All right. A story that in the United States, which seemed like a domestic story, and which here in Europe we have mostly shied away from. But this Friday, a new development. We're talking about a wealthy financier who's hobnobbed with U.S. presidents, current and former. The case of Jeffrey Epstein, who this week was accused of sexually abusing dozens of underage girls, perhaps more to come, now forcing the resignation of Donald Trump's labor secretary. Alex Acosta, seen here alongside Trump at the White House, was the top federal prosecutor at the Justice Department's Miami bureau when he oversaw a 2008 non-prosecution agreement with Epstein, who avoided federal charges and served 13 months in jail. Did the labor secretary have to go, Christopher Dickey? Because, U.S. federal prosecutors, sometimes they lower the charges to make sure they get a conviction.
I think that Acosta made a reasonable case for what he did when he gave a press conference. But on the other hand, he was completely contradicted by the state prosecutors. So that was not good. And it's not a good optic for this president, particularly, to have someone in his cabinet who's given a sweetheart deal to basically a child molester. Well, not basically, to an alleged child molester of lots of underage girls. So I think that I don't think it was an extreme thing for Acosta to go, and I think it's interesting that he went so quickly. I think it shows how nervous Trump actually is about this, even though I suspect he personally was not involved in any of Epstein's abuses. I think he certainly was a buddy of Epstein
Now,
for a while.
the Daily Beast broke the story, and it's got a Paris angle to it, Christopher. We can call it. Tell us about this picture here.
That's Epstein's apartment here in Paris. It's on the second floor. It's the one, it's sort of the middle windows there with the curtains are drawn. I'm not sure if you can see that. I went over there the other day and to see if there was anybody around who knew Epstein. And to my surprise and delight, there was a man at lunchtime who was walking into had a key to the gate and was walking into the apartment building. And I said, so how do you know Epstein? And he says, yeah, I knew him as a neighbor. I was careful. And I said, well, So I thought I'd phrase this diplomatically. He said, he left a couple of days ago. I said, yeah, he left 5 days ago and he was arrested as soon as he landed in the States and charged with all this child abuse or all this sexual issues with underage girls. And he goes, yeah. And I said, so you didn't see any underage girls coming and going here, did you?
Jeez.
And he said, mais si, yes, I did. I said, oh, yeah?
Did he call the cops?
No, I didn't ask him if he called the cops. I was so surprised he said yes. And I said, so, And he said, yeah. He says, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Wow.
Then he walked inside and closed the
Isn't that
gate.
interesting? He saw underage girls coming into...
This is France.
Oh,
Well,
please
could
don't
you-
give me that line.
Well, they don't. If you look at half the French cinema in which there are young women. It's incredible. Look at the careers of people, whether you're talking about Sophie Marceau or.
Yeah, but cinema is one thing, and many underage girls.
I'm not
going into an
arguing that.
apartment.
I'm not arguing that it should be tolerated, but I am saying that first of all, French neighbors don't.
You're saying this is France. Is this a case, though, of somebody who's
I'm saying that
living in this very
in France, it
wealthy-
would be highly unlikely that your neighbor, especially in a multi-million-dollar building, would interfere in your personal business, particularly if it's just a question of seeing people come and go to an apartment.
in the case of this man who's unknown here in Europe until this case broke? Is it a story about if you've got money, you can make anything go away up to a point?
Oh, I think that there's an assumption about that not only in the United States, but here in France as well. I mean, every so often a prosecutor will bring charges against somebody famous in this country for some kind of sexual crime or sexual activity. I mean, I spent a lot of time covering the Dominique Strauss-Kahn case in the United States. And that's a case I'm not sure would ever have been brought here in France. And then it was dropped by Cyrus Vance, who also let other people go, including Epstein, on some charges.
What's your takeaway from this story, Ben?
It's just highly disturbing that this kind of thing. I mean, if what this neighbor is saying is true, then he was also doing these horrific things in France as well. Where else was he
Probably.
doing them? And
We know where he
clearly-
had other apartments.
Yeah, and he clearly was hobnobbing with some of the most important, most powerful people in the U.S. How do we believe that no one knew or no one had any inkling or suspicion? It's just, I don't know what else to think of this than to be deeply disturbed.
Well, Trump had a suspicion. He said he liked the ladies, especially young, or he had
Yeah,
a
on the
Like
young
myself.
side.
On the
young
young
side.
side.
Like, I mean,
Yeah, but he
that
said
could be
like
20,
myself,
you
and he
know,
was.
on the young side could be 19 or 20, which is legal. It's not underage, and there is a difference.
Yeah, but I
for
think
a reason.
it wasn't not a surprise that Trump separated quite fast from
that's what the
Acosta,
Acosta
because I mean,
resignation is
there
about.
were photos of him and Epstein, and I think Clinton was on a plane with him 26 times, and
Clinton
he had a
was the
lot
one.
of connections. So it's like Weinstein coming to the political sphere, and who knows what
But Weinstein's victims were not
consequences there are.
underage.
Yeah.
We'll leave it there. I want to thank you very much, Ulrike Kolterman, Christopher Dickey, Nick Spicer, and Rim Momtaz. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emerald Maxwell.
Hello.
What have you got?
Well, I'm actually starting with Alex Acosta's resignation as Labour Secretary.
Oh.
So picking up on what you're talking about. There's been a lot of very critical reaction, mostly from the left, it has to be said. The New Yorker asking, how did the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein remain immune from real punishment for so long, in part because of a deal negotiated by Alex Acosta, who just resigned from his position. And so there's a lot of, it's quite harsh voices coming out there. And then, but actually, other people pointing out, this journalist pointing out that it was actually the Senate who approved him in the first place as Labour secretary, and that this was, they knew already about his history. And here he's the list of 52 Republicans and 8 Democrats who voted to confirm him. Of course, there's been huge turnover in Trump's cabinet. And this reporter, Kate Bennett, pointing out he's the 13th cabinet member to depart the Trump administration. By this time, in the Obama administration, none had left. In Bush's, only one had. There's been a lot of speculation over whether it was Acosta's decision to resign or whether he was pushed out by Trump. And here we have, earlier today, Trump said it was not him. He stood at Acosta's side and said, it's him, not me, because I'm with him. But actually, a lot of people are skeptical of that. Miami Herald here saying it comes just 2 days after Acosta defended himself for over several hours about his decision. So it seems a bit unlikely, especially with the Trump's 2020 campaign coming up.
This is a different
Acosta, no relation.
From CNN, yeah.
He says that Trump was stewing over his fate yesterday because he's worried about the more revelations coming out.
Just a question on this. How hard will the Democrats press? Because, as you mentioned, Bill Clinton.
I think that if they thought they could get Trump, they would easily throw Bill Clinton to the wolves at this point. Yeah. He's nothing to the Democratic Party at this point. They will use anything they can to get Trump, but I don't think they're going to get Trump on this one.
Well, yes, on Democrats, there was a lot of pressure for them, obviously, for him to resign. Here, Beto O'Rourke not letting Trump off the hook. He says he had to resign, but he never should have been appointed. Trump knew Acosta's history when he nominated him. And the Washington Post ties this into the Me Too movement. It says that it's the reckoning continues, and that he says this is an opinion piece. More women are choosing to come forward with accounts of sexual assault, and many authorities appear to be taking such allegations more seriously than they once did. And this resignation is an example of that.
Here in France, a story you've been following for us, Emerald, which is these migrants who've been staging these sort of pop-up protests.
Yes, and the latest, most high-profile one, it was today when they stormed the Panthéon and occupied it. Here we have a video of them inside the Panthéon. And of course, the Panthéon it's a very significant building in Paris. It's a
mausoleum,
exactly.
So
it's where a lot of
heroes of the Republic are buried.
Exactly. So that the location of this occupation has caused some controversy. This journalist saying that their chosen spot was beneath a statue representing France reading "Live Free or Die." But a lot of people are sort of angry, especially on the right, are angry about their location. And so here we have, well, actually, on one side you have some senators like Esther Bombassa, she's for the Ecology Party, who came to offer support to them. But then you have on the other side, you have Marine Le Pen, who says it's really unacceptable to see illegal immigrants occupying with impunity the Panthéon. In France, the only future for an illegal immigrant should be expulsion. That's the law. Because this basically, the Panthéon is very much part of it's a French institution. And other people coming back from the other side of the political spectrum saying that's really quite hypocritical because to all those saying black vests don't deserve their papers because they don't respect French institutions, what about the yellow vests? They break things too, don't they? So should we send them back to Yellow Vest Land?
Right.
Yes.
Emerald Maxwell, I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you. And by the way, we'll see you on the other side of summer. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.
Let's see.